anything touching cannabis starts with real estate. It starts with property. It starts with location, whether you're cultivating, manufacturing, processing, distributing, dispensing. It just comes back to the fact is you need the locations to operate out of.
This episode brought to you by Suites at Madison. Meeting and conference rooms for rent by the hour, week, month, or year. Suites at Madison, where business gets done. Check them out at www.downtowntampaoffice.com. Now, on to the show.
You are listening to the Invest Florida Real Estate Show, covering topics in lending, buy and sell strategies, property management, hot markets, and tips and tools to guide you along the way on your path to real estate success. You want Florida investment real estate talk? You have come to the right place. And now, our hosts, Eric Odom and Steven Silverman.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Invest Florida Real Estate Show. This is your co-host, Eric Odom, along with Steven Silverman. Very unique episode today, Steven.
Eric, it's unique because there's a new wave coming and people should pay attention.
With the properties that we manage, we're talking medical marijuana tenants in this episode. And it's a unique topic. We have not covered this before, but really it came about since the voters put it in action a couple of years ago. And so you're starting to see already the proliferation of tenants pop up, medical marijuana tenants pop up around the state. And we're getting a number of questions from landlords of whether they should participate or not. A couple of our centers I know we've discussed, we have one in Brandon and then also one in Newport Richey, that the landlords are very willing. They're cannabis friendly and they're interested in having a medical marijuana user in their plaza. We're going to have others that are a little bit more reluctant. There could be reasons for that. Maybe there is a child care center that's nearby that they really can't have a user, or there might be other reasons they don't allow alcohol or tobacco consumers or tenants. They might put this into that category as well, and they're not as interested in hosting these types of tenants. But I think really the bottom line here, Stephen, is that this is a significant new type of tenant coming into the market, and they're going to be consuming a lot of space.
And to ignore them would be really short-sighted. It's true. It's like, as you said, it's not for everyone, but it's a great opportunity for others.
And make your decision informed. Don't just say, well, I'm not interested because of X reason. Well, X reason, if it's a logical reason that it's founded in fact, that's great. If not, we're hoping that, in terms of, this is an episode, hopefully, that we're going to be providing you with a little bit more data and maybe some ideas to think about of whether this is a great fit for you. In the meantime, wanted to thank one of our listeners. It's always great when we hear from our listeners. We love it, especially when they go on to the iTunes or the Google Play Store and leave us reviews, because that's where our guests go to look to see if people are actually paying attention. And it is helpful for you guys to leave reviews. And if you've not done that, we really would appreciate you taking 2 minutes and leaving us a review and letting potential guests know what you think about us. But I did want to thank Michael Keogh. He was mentioning the Neil Bawa show that we recently had. I think it was episode 156, that we talked about multifamily in the center of the state of Florida and what's the outlook. And Neil's a very data-driven guy. It struck a chord with Michael, and he leaves a note basically saying, nice work, fellas. This was the best podcast I've listened to in quite some time. Michael, we always love hearing from you. We love your feedback. That type of feedback not only helps us with guests, it also helps us understand more what you guys like to hear and why. So appreciate that. If you guys, if you haven't done so, go to Google or iTunes, leave us a quick review, leave us a note. That is helpful for us. We do like to get the feedback. Stephen, is there anything else that we need to talk about before we roll into our guest?
I like the pun, Eric. Let's roll into it. Today we have with us Leslie Plettner, who is the Managing Director of Base Canna, and Jack Boyajian, who is the CEO of Base Canna. Base Canna has the financial resources and the vision to navigate the uncharted waters of the new cannabis industry. As a leader of the industry, Base Canna gives support to cannabis entrepreneurs. I should mention that we are talking today to Leslie and Jack. We're in Florida. They're in California. California leads the pack and is ahead of us. And so this is information for all of us here on the other coast. So Leslie and Jack, welcome to the Invest Florida show.
Thank you very much for having us. We're happy to be here.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, guys, we really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. Why don't you give us a 30,000-foot view of how you arrived to where you are today with Base Canna in the medical marijuana industry? Jack, why don't you just start, and Leslie will follow with you.
Sure. Thank you so much. So I have my background in real estate. After coming out of the Wharton School, I jumped into the real estate with gumption. I developed and converted and managed over 30,000 residential units, eventually a couple million square feet of commercial property, and then thereafter we've done development of real property, land development, building, and over the last 20 years, we've managed about $3 billion worth of property, both domestically and internationally. I basically got interested in the cannabis business from a personal level. My wife had a pretty severe disease that she was diagnosed with a couple of years ago, and she was given opioids as a way of managing her pain, which was very detrimental to her health overall. And I saw what was going on, and I had to find a solution for her. And so she was introduced to the cannabinoids in the oils that I was able to get for her. And it changed her life. It changed our family dynamic. It changed everything to the positive. And I became a strong advocate for the medical marijuana marketplace because I saw it firsthand in my own life, how impactful it could be. With the proper diagnosis and the proper dosing, it is a game changer. It is a life changer. So that's what became my motivation to launch Base Canna. And Base Canna was essentially developed through the concept of recognizing that cannabis, all sorts of cannabis, anything touching cannabis starts with real estate. It starts with property. It starts with location, whether you're cultivating, manufacturing, processing, distributing, dispensing. It just comes back to the fact is you need the locations to operate out of. So we noticed that a lot of landlords and a lot of landowners just are not friendly to cannabis because maybe they don't understand it. Maybe they have some other reasons for being anti-cannabis. And so we decided that we're going to create an opportunity for entrepreneurs to come into our ecosystem and be able to gain the facilities that they need with a turnkey scenario where they don't have to really do much except come in with their IP, with their process, whatever it is that they have special, and be able to just, operate. And we take all the pain points away from them, help them to deal with those issues in a compliant manner. And so their invested dollars goes a long way because they don't have to do any kind of infrastructure investment, and they can focus as well on their product. So that's the whole concept of Base Canna, to help these entrepreneurs get a foothold, literally and figuratively, in the cannabis industry, and help them to flourish and to gain market share, not only in California but eventually in all the states.
I'll be brief. I've been an entrepreneur since middle school. As a professional, I took my entrepreneurial spirit into education. I designed schools. I transformed underperforming ones, mostly working through the intersection of leadership, culture, talent development, and inquiry. I designed schools and transformed underperforming ones. Once I decided to have a family, a little more than a decade ago, I shifted my entrepreneurial interest into real estate, and I started a real estate development company in 2009. I worked a lot in residential, multifamily, warehouse, and then in 2015, I heard that Prop 64 was going to be on the ballot in California, and I knew that the industry was looking for cannabis-friendly landlords and professional entrepreneurs, and I haven't turned back since. So I've been pretty focused in cannabis real estate since 2015.
So just talking about the industry now, and California's a little bit ahead of us, but it's certainly started in Florida. Can you help us understand how the world looks at cannabis and if it's recognized as a legitimate industry?
Yeah, and we want to focus on it. I want people to understand before we get too into the weeds on this. This is a real estate show. And so landlords, stick with us. We're not abandoning you here. This is a subject that you need to understand because there's going to be a considerable amount of retail space coming online in regards to the cannabis industry. So this is what we're talking about. We're addressing you, the retail landlords, how you cultivate and manage a medical marijuana tenant. Along those lines, understand that our listener base is going to be landlord oriented. I don't want to lose you guys and think that we're going off topic here. We are talking about, talking to our listeners here. We are talking about real estate here and the opportunity and how you need to deal with some of the obstacles. So I'm sorry to interrupt, guys. Go ahead.
No, Eric, that's great. So cannabis is a legitimate industry, and in order for landlords to understand what is in front of them, they have to have some sense of what's happening in the industry. So we can take that question and answer it really quickly. Cannabis is absolutely a legitimate industry. I'll talk about it for a few reasons. I mean, first, and I won't spend a long time here, cannabis has significant healing properties and can treat dozens and dozens of illnesses, ranging from arthritis to cancer to heart disease to epilepsy to anxiety. And perhaps what's most noteworthy now is the opioid crisis. So cannabis effectively manages pain. So because of this, a lot of people are waking up to the medicinal value of cannabis. The user base is growing significantly, and I might talk a little bit more about that later. But cannabis has massive medicinal value. People are realizing that. It's a very legitimate option to opioids. And that's one reason why cannabis is a legitimate industry, because of its medicinal qualities. Secondly, stigma is really shifting. It's legitimate because people say it is. I mean, 64% of Americans support full cannabis legalization. That was a Gallup poll in October 2017. And in April of this year, a Quinnipiac poll found that 93% of Americans support medical legalization. So it's also legitimate because people are saying it's legitimate. The other piece that I'll focus on is that cannabis is moving rapidly from the unregulated to the regulated market. There are 30 states and the District of Columbia that have passed some laws regulating cannabis, either medically, adult use, or decriminalizing it in some way. Of those 30 states, 9, as well as the District of Columbia, have passed adult use. And, the tax revenue is making it very legitimate and a source of income that states want to protect. So you can go to governing.com for, I'm just letting people know it's a great website to kind of track state adoption on cannabis. But it's legitimate for that reason.
So, Jack, I know that you've done some research. We just recently passed an amendment in the state of Florida, and you're starting to see facilities pop up around the state. What would landlords need to know about any kind of general pertinent information? Would their property qualify for a medical marijuana tenant?
Yes, I think that's an important question. If I understand things the way they are in Florida right now, there is a licensing process that someone who wants to actually sell or grow or dispense or distribute marijuana, medical marijuana, they have to go through that process. So there are some requirements. For example, you can't be within 1,000 feet of a church, a school, a park, sensitive areas where children are either congregating or being taught. Those, you have to be 1,000 feet away from that to be able to be in the space.
Okay.
There's other requirements too, both in terms of hours, when you can open, when you need to close. Some of the things about making sure that you have security when you're within your facility, that because there's a concern with diversion of product, and so each of your employees probably has to be gone through some sort of a process of looking at criminal background. So these are requirements that on an operational level. But for a landlord, the key is to get the right tenant. And what I mean by the right tenant is you want the tenant who has an experience level that is demonstrable, that can be shown, that there's a particular history of doing whatever it is that they're getting licensed for in that particular facility. And the benefit to the landlord is that typically you're going to receive a higher per square foot return from that tenant as compared to a tenant that's using it for a different purpose. In the state of California, if we used it as a barometer, it could range between 50 to 150% premium for a cannabis use as compared to a different use that's non-cannabis.
Interesting.
Same space, but that's how much of a premium it is currently commanding. Will it stay that wide and that wide of a margin? I don't know. But I can guess that as some landlords, new landlords begin to be more comfortable, there'll be the competitive pressures, and those premiums will probably start declining or coming narrower between the market versus the marijuana market use. But I still think there'll always be a premium.
So we're talking about landlords now, but can you explain the structure of the industry just so I can understand who the landlords are? Because we have some people who are growing, others who are dispensing, other spaces are like office spaces where they only prescribe.
And before we get into that question, I just want to tie up the last question and how it pertains to Florida. I think that, and you guys, if you have anything to add, Florida had a very serious issue with pill mills. And in the current attorney general in the state of Florida went very aggressively after the closure of these. And there were a lot of landlords that were put in bad situations. So first of all, the pill mills have nothing to do with medical marijuana. That's issue number one. It's an apple and orange comparison. It's a rhinoceros and an apple comparison. But the sort of lingering issue out there that so many of the landlords were left holding the bag when the laws changed and the situations with the negative situations had with pill mills. I would imagine that the rates are going to reflect that. And you say 100 or 50 to 100% more it's probably going to be the same because you're going to have a lot of the owners of the retail, centers that had experience with pill mills. Again, not the same thing. I want to make sure that the listeners understand that, but it's still, they're going, because of the lack of knowledge, they're going to continue to ask for a premium, and that's probably going to continue in the state. And you had just made the comment, you don't know how California would apply to Florida. I think it's very applicable because of the situation we had with the pill mills and how landlords would perceive. So I don't know if you have anything else that you want to add to that, but again, it's a point towards the Florida landlords that it's an apple and rhinoceros comparison between a pill mill and a medical marijuana facility, but you're still going to have a restricted amount of supply of landlords that would want to because of their recent experience.
Well, also there's some restrictions and limitations from the state licensing bureaus as well. Now, recently, the state announced a couple of weeks ago that they're going to issue an additional 4 medical marijuana treatment center licenses in the state of Florida. And the state health department expects that they'll be swamped with as many as 400 applications for these lucrative licenses. So, but that's because you've got, now you're exceeding 100,000 patients that have already registered with the state. And that actually created a milestone that allowed each of the 13 existing licensees who have multiple locations to open 5 more dispensary locations each. So the state is responding to the actual consumer demands coming out of the medical side of it. And you have to go through a process to get a medical prescription in Florida. It's not as easy as other states. So this is actually a very clear indication that Florida may actually be on its way to what some believe will be 500,000 prescribed prescriptions or individuals that are prescribed. So that creates a huge market. I mean, by some estimates, it's well over $1 billion by 2020. So, but here's the point. If the state limits the number of licenses or the number of locations, that naturally will create a limited market. And so therefore, you're going to have that premium continue. But eventually, as the licenses gain, you have more and more licensees, and you have more and more, landlords being comfortable with it. And let's be honest here. I know all about the pill mill, but, in 1996, California passed the medical marijuana for the first time in anywhere in the country. And for 20 years, while it didn't have a lot of developed restrictions, it survived and it grew. And it was a little bit of a, wishy-washy environment, but you didn't see the likes of the pill mills coming about, the massive problems that created. I mean, and now Colorado's been around, with both their medical and their recreational laws in place for several years. And there's no horror stories there either of the likes that you mentioned. So I agree with you. The rhinoceros apple comparison is very clearly there, but I realize that people have long memories, right? And sometimes those things will impact people's adoption rate on a new product like this.
Let me just also add around the pill mill that the opposite is true. There's been research done to show that dispensaries actually create safer neighborhoods. They reduce crime, and it's kind of easy to understand because dispensaries have the security personnel, and just because of their presence, the neighborhood automatically becomes safer. I believe it was UCLA that did the research that showed that crime, dropped around the actual dispensary. So the opposite is actually true.
Interesting.
In terms of what happened with the pill mill.
Well, let's get back to your question, Stephen. You had a question.
So we've been having this discussion about landlords, and I'm trying to understand the structure of who these landlords are, because you have a dispensary use, which is like a retail environment. You have a prescribing location, which is an office type of property, and then you have the growing, which would or storage, which would be industrial. So, can you just give a little bit of detail on how the structure works?
I think, Jack, I'll talk a little bit about the licenses, and then you can add. So, in order to, real estate is absolutely the underpinning of the industry, and that's because there are multiple licenses that are available in different categories. So, for instance, in California, the different categories are cultivate, manufacture, test, distribute, dispense. There's storefront dispensing, there's delivery dispensing, and then there's also events. And there's a number of licenses available under each category. All of these licenses are tied to real estate. Because there isn't, interstate commerce, and because federal prohibition exists, Florida has to create a closed loop system where, in order for patients to get access to the medicine, it has to be grown and processed and manufactured and tested and distributed all within California. So all of those different license types require real estate.
So it's the same in Florida. It's a closed loop system in Florida as well.
Yeah, California's not it's all the states are closed with regards to federal prohibition. Like you cannot, Florida
no interstate
cannot
commerce,
buy,
sure.
Medical cannabis from California. Florida is a closed loop system in that there's a limited licenses, whereas as in California, it's more of an open market. So that's how the market is distinct between Florida and California.
Right. I think Leslie meant that Florida was a closed loop system, not California. Yeah.
I know part of the issue has been related to banking and how do landlords get paid out of this, and because you can't use the federal banking system and write checks, can you? How are they getting paid?
There's creative ways, when necessity breeds inventive, spirit. And so what's happened is there are different ways in which depending on where you are in the chain of development of cultivation all the way down to dispensary, there's ways in which you can use the banking system or use cash to convert into an actual payment form. And every day there's a new company coming out. Blockchain and Bitcoin has actually helped Bitcoin, a little bit in that operational side. Canada, as you know, has just become licensed nationally, has approved cannabis, both medically and recreationally. And there are a lot of banking systems that actually interplay between Canada and the United States. Okay. So there are some new possibilities there. That's not the problem. It is a burden. It's basically an overhead scenario, but that's not stopping, and it will not stop the growth in this business. Okay. It just won't. There's just too much demand. This tide can't come back. It will not reverse. And so it's a question of, can you slow it down without the banking system? Sure. But here's what I would tell you. Your listeners, whether they be real estate entrepreneurs or investors in real estate, that want to be part of this nascent industry, and because it kind of is our lifting of the prohibition, right, of the 1920s. Well, in some ways, you got to thank what's going on. You got to be thankful, because if the banking system were to open up, and the federal laws would actually allow for some sort of activity, interstate commerce, you're going to have very large companies with substantial capital crowd out the smaller entrepreneurs. Uh-huh. This gives us some time to, as entrepreneurs, to become part of the system, to gain a foothold, to gain some market share. And then when the federal prohibition eventually is lifted, then we would, our operations and our facilities that is real estate based could be a very attractive opportunity and product for someone with money that wants to come in and have a large ecosystem to play in, look to acquire.
Okay.
So look at what happened just a few weeks ago. MedMen spent $53 million in one of your dispensary and cultivation operations, and paid half of that in cash and the other half as stock. And they're a Canadian company now, basically operating out of Canadian, stock exchange. And that was in Florida. So imagine at that times 10 with a major company 3 to 5 years from now. And that's what you have an opportunity to gain a foothold in today, whether it be in Florida, whether it be in California, or all the other states that are now coming to understanding this industry and how big it can be.
Well, it's interesting that you mention the Canadian company entering Florida, because actually we had a caller that we had talked about having you guys on the show earlier, and we had a caller who had left a message on our website. In fact, anybody who's listening and wants to do that, you have the ability to, whether by laptop or computer or cell phone, to just push a button on our investfloridashow.com site and leave a message for us, a question for our guests. And in this particular case, we have a question from a listener that asks some specific questions to you guys. So let's just go ahead and address them now.
Hi, this is Carter Henderson. I'm a commercial realtor here in Tampa, and I'm working with a medical marijuana group to identify dispensary locations throughout the Bay Area. And I'm curious what success stories you've had in other states as dispensaries start to come into Tampa. Particularly curious on the locations in terms of have standalone buildings been the best, or do customers maybe like to see a dispensary in a strip center aligned with other successful or recognizable retail names? Also curious, do you recommend they go into smaller neighborhood locations, or should they seek the higher traffic, higher visibility on larger commercial corridors? And finally, in terms of demographics, what would you look for to place a dispensary in terms of age range and income range? I look forward to your response. Thank you.
I'll go ahead and answer that question. Let me see. First, I'd say if you're looking at a high traffic or a neighborhood dispensary, you probably are going to lean in the direction of a high traffic area.
High visibility,
especially because there are going to be high traffic, high visibility. You want to be known. You want to be seen on foot. You want to be seen in the car. You want to be seen maybe from the freeway. Because Florida isn't, releasing a ton of retail opportunity, you want to make sure that you're going to be seen. So I would always pick a high traffic area with good ingress and egress.
Okay.
You've got to remember this is a retail experience, and especially as people are learning more about cannabis, they need to be able to park their car, spend some time. I mean, some people spend up to 20, 30, 45 minutes in a store before making a purchase. So you want to have a high traffic area, great ingress, egress. A standalone building or a strip mall. There's actually a colleague of mine who was inside of the mall in Richmond, California, and he first went there because of discretion, and he thought that that's what the patients really wanted, the discretion. He has since moved outside across the street in a high visible road, and that's what I would definitely recommend people doing. I think a standalone building would work. I think a strip mall would work too. I think it would depend a little bit more on location, but I think either a standalone building or being inside of a strip mall would be a potential option. I would say avoid going inside.
Obviously, on the strip center, you've got co-tenancy issues. There are going to be, there's going to be some retailers that are going to have some objections, and it's going to be in their lease that certain types of tenants are not going to be allowed, and it very well could be marijuana dispensaries.
Sure. And then it's also important this is a nascent industry. It's emerging. We've got to keep educating. If I were the landlord in that strip mall, I would say, hey, this dispensary is going to bring security and safety to all of us. So I just want to emphasize we have to keep, we have to stay grounded in the facts, and that is true, that the presence of dispensaries create greater security in a neighborhood. Stephen, your question?
When we're talking about dispensaries, what's the typical size of how many square feet?
Well, I would say, during the 215 era in California, you had dispensaries that were as small as like 400 square feet of space. Now that we're moving more towards a regulated market and we're moving more towards a developed retail consumer experience, I'm seeing that retailers want at least 1,500 square feet of space. Some are going up to 3,000 square feet of space. But you probably, if you're smart with how you use your space, I imagine, you could probably do well with 1,000 square feet of space.
Okay. And who are typical co-tenants that you've, in any strip center or retail environment, you're looking for compatibility?
Yes. We don't have nearly as many strip centers in the Bay Area. That exists a little bit more in Southern California. You want to think about who are the cannabis users and what else might they want to be doing. So the fastest growing cannabis user base are people 45 years and older. In fact, the CDC did a study, and they found between 2002 2012, there was an increase of 50% of monthly use for ages 45 to 54. And from ages 55 to 64, it's a 455% increase. And seniors 65 and older had a 333% increase.
Of course, there's so many issues. Yeah, as you get older, this makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Women and seniors are the fastest growing demographic for users. So you got to think, what else might they want to do? Well, they may want to work out. They may want to do some retail shopping. They may want to go grocery shopping. So you just have to think of that demographic. Older women and seniors. What else what are complementary services that are going to entice them to choose your strip mall over another one?
I'm sure there's a pizza joke in there somewhere, but I'm just not going to go down that road. Can you talk a little bit about demographics, the age and income? You talked about the age, but what about income level? Is it age or income indiscriminate, or what are we looking at here from an income level standpoint?
So what I've seen is that let's just take Oakland for example. That's where I live. Dispensaries have done incredibly well in all neighborhoods, regardless of income. So we got to remember that everybody has the potential to need cannabis for medical treatment in Florida, and that transcends income level. And dispensaries have done incredibly well in all different neighborhoods in California, regardless of income. Well, in Oakland in particular, regardless of income. So, in fact, I've heard some retailers swear that they're better in lower income neighborhoods. I mean, I've heard retailers say that in San Francisco. I've heard retailers also say that in Oakland.
And so how did the typical dispensaries look? I mean, did they try and give them an upscale kind of feel, or is it like a more comfortable kind of feel, or is it different in each demographic environment?
There's definitely a trend moving towards upscale, user-friendly, multimedia retail experience. So I would say it looks inviting. It looks comfortable. There are stations that I mean, honestly, to me, it's like pharmaceutical meets Apple. The Apple experience. So when you go into an Apple store, there's iPads there that you can learn about the different products with the iPads as little stations, and I'm seeing more and more of rich, interactive media coming into the retail space. In fact, there's several startup companies that are starting to get a niche in that area. They want to sit down. They don't necessarily want to go to a counter to talk to somebody. They want someone to come to the floor and talk to them. So you're seeing consultants, or what some people call bud tenders, like out on the floor. You're seeing stations, highly interactive stations on the floor. You're seeing beautiful display cases. That is absolutely the trend in cannabis retail.
And I'll just add to that MedMen, for example, that we were just talking about, that made that acquisition in your state. They are absolutely setting the trend with expending somewhere between $1 million to $1.5 million in a typical 1,500 to 2,000 square foot dispensary. And
wow.
It's everything that Leslie was saying and then some. I mean, it is the high tech meets the customer service, personal interface with the user who needs guidance and with discretion. And I think that is going to continue as a trend. So they can afford to pay double the rate on a per square foot basis because they have customers that are coming, they're providing the service. And by the way, speaking about, basically, having some sort of prohibition in a strip center or some sort of facility. I mean, I don't know about you, but I haven't heard a lot of facilities barring pharmacies. In fact, in most cases, a restaurant would love to have a Walgreens nearby, or CVS, because it has foot traffic. It gains foot traffic. So why should it be any different with medical cannabis?
Well,
it will be pharmaceutical grade.
It would be interesting to see how it plays out. But our largest grocery store chain here has very aggressive, what they consider to be sin clauses, and that includes alcohol, tobacco, any type of gaming, anything that is and it's a very broad legal description of what is considered to be illegal. It's anything that does not comply with federal law, state law, local law, blah, blah, blah. It's a very, very liberal definition of what's illegal. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out, because this particular grocery store chain controls a considerable amount of Class A retail space in the state of Florida. And whether they would block or not, I don't know. I mean, maybe some of our listeners have had some experience. It will be interesting to see.
What would be interesting for me is, do they sell alcohol in their stores? Do they have a pharmacy in those stores, those large grocery stores?
Pharmacy, but not alcohol.
Well, define alcohol. Wine, beer?
Okay.
Well, see, wine and beer. Like if you read their quote unquote sin clause that they have in their lease, and I know that it's been evolving over the years, but any standalone store that is alcohol only, they do not allow in the same center with them. And as well as,
and you would have to wonder if that's a competitive edge, if there's a sin clause there because they want competition to be limited.
I'm not privy to to why they make the decisions that they make, but I do know that on their centers,
Sure.
they do require approval of most of the co-tenants, and in at least a tacit check, and there are a list of things that they do not allow. So I don't know, maybe some listeners out there have some experience. Everybody knows what I'm talking about here, and they might be able to chime back in on the web if they've had some experience with some of these larger grocery tenants, what they've done. And because we have a number of dispensaries that are already popping up around the area, so people are starting to gain more and more experience, and we'd like to learn ourselves what's happening.
So if you're a landlord, how do you take advantage of this? How do you find the tenants in this market segment to fill your center?
I would put into the description of your ads and or your broker's ads, and whether it be on CoStar or LoopNet or wherever you're advertising space, you would include that you are cannabis friendly.
Yeah.
You are, your
Sure.
facility is cannabis friendly and or cannabis qualified. And of course, keep in mind that when you get licensed, you license both the operator and the facility, and the two cannot be split. So if a operator gets a license in your facility and doesn't do well and has to close down, the next tenant doesn't automatically get that license, but has a better chance of getting relicensed because that previous tenant had used that facility for cannabis use.
Understood.
So there are advantages to the landlord's ability to attract and gain a licensee, and because not just for that licensee, but the future as well. And again, I preface that there is some indication in California and other states where cannabis has become both recreationally available as well as medically available, that the centers or the locations where the dispensaries are or the distribution centers are, they get more foot traffic than, let's say, a competing location that doesn't have that.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the risks a little bit from the landlord perspective. You're one of the positions that you talk about is, well, and I'd be interested if you have a report, Leslie, we'd like to share that in our notes. If you could be kind enough to send that to me, we'll post the UCLA report. But what are the other risks that maybe are perceived and real or perceived and not real that are out there for the landlord?
Sure, I'll go ahead and jump in. So let's talk a bit about the perceived risks. There's a perceived risk that, okay, if I'm going to have a cannabis business, they're going to be, they're going to be unprofessional. They're going to be potheads. So that is absolutely, when you're just very far from the truth, when you're moving from an unregulated to a regulated industry, it just requires quite a bit of business acumen, capitalization. And so we're seeing incredibly well experienced professionals coming to the table, looking to rent spaces. So that's perceived potheads. I also said, I already talked about the criminal activities being a perceived risk, but it's not. And I will send you that UCLA research for sure. And there's another risk around civil asset forfeiture. So, in California, for instance, our law protects landlords from arrest, prosecution, or other sanctions under the state law, such as a civil fine or seizure of forfeiture of assets. So in California, civil asset forfeiture is not a concern if you are renting your facility to a licensed cannabis operator. Now, if it's not licensed, that's another problem. But if you're renting to a licensed operator, then that's not a real risk. I can talk a little bit about real risks now. So certainly if you're looking to acquire or purchase, you've got to make sure that you pay attention to the zoning. Zoning can be a little bit tricky, and zoning varies, by each city and each state. I mean, San Francisco zoning is very different than Oakland zoning. So you just have to make sure that you're paying attention to zoning and that you do your research with the municipality to make sure that they're not about to change their zoning. I can tell you some stories about that, but just pay attention to zoning and check in with the municipality and make sure that that it's on their calendar to rediscuss rezoning the city. Another real risk is that your tenant has got to pay taxes. If your tenant does not pay taxes, they could easily be shut down, and therefore you're not getting any rent. Uh-huh. Another legitimate risk is OSHA. The federal government actually doesn't have a lot to leverage in terms of coming after businesses that are legal in their state. But if you're violating OSHA, you could get fined, and the fines could be so big that you could be shut down. So you want to make sure that you're taking care of the OSHA requirements. Here's another real risk: green rush illusions. Some landlords, are like, hey, I have a cannabis tenant. I'm going to get a lot of money. Here's what we have to remember. The cannabis tenant still has a business. There's much more overhead in this industry than other industries, in part because of 280E. So the cannabis operator has significant overhead. I'm not exactly sure what the tax treatment is going to be in Florida or in different municipalities in Florida, but landlords have to understand that there's significant overhead for a cannabis operator, and you just can't get too greedy. I think, can you get a premium? Yes. But if you ask for too much, you actually might be putting your cannabis operator in jeopardy of failing. And I want to talk a little bit about a risk that is actually both perceived and real, and that's the federal prohibition. And let me just say that on our website, I've created an animation video about 7 minutes long that goes through a timeline of modern federal prohibition. So I'll say this: the more you know about federal prohibition, the less concerned you are about it. There are federal protections that coexist alongside federal prohibition. The Rohrabacher-Blumenauer Amendment is an amendment to the spending bill that doesn't allow the Department of Justice to spend any money persecuting cannabis businesses that are operating legally within their state. That's huge. So go to the animation, check it out. But my short two responses are: the more you know, the less you're concerned about it. And if you're renting to a cannabis business that is operating legally within the state, the risk of federal interference is incredibly low. And there's 40 laws right now that Congress is looking at. They're very proactively trying to legislate to keep the federal government from interfering with states' right on regulating this matter.
Interesting. Good stuff. Guys, I know that are you doing anything in the state of Florida? You're looking to come in the state of Florida. Talk a little bit about what you're wanting to accomplish right now.
So we actually had a meeting with a gentleman who actually built 65,000 square feet of greenhouse in Florida, more towards the northern part of Florida, about 2 years ago. And his team is from Florida. He's now building here in California, and he's going to operate here several manufacturing facilities as well as grow facilities in Nevada. So we've actually looked at and are looking very carefully at Florida in terms of bringing our model there. We think it will work very well there. Your listeners could go to basecanna.com. That's what Leslie was talking about. That's where they're going to find that federal prohibition video, as well as some other information about what our process is and what we're looking for in terms of meeting the investors and the operators together in the environments that both can flourish and succeed. So our minimums are only about $75,000. We are only offering these investment opportunities to accredited investors. Our pipeline is gaining a lot of momentum and traction from all sorts of things that we talked about: cultivation, manufacturing, processing, dispensing. I want to make one other add-on to what Leslie was talking about how the perceived risks and the real risks are converging or maybe separating as well. One of the things you're your listeners should really be focused on is that if they own a cannabis friendly facility and have a cannabis tenant, their lease should have some very specific compliance requirements that I see missing in many of the retail leases that are generally floating out there and being used by attorneys. There is a host of compliance issues that go well beyond the traditional, fire, safety, health issues that the cities have, been accustomed to, managing and maintaining over the last, century or more. This is a new game for both the facility managers, the city managers, the city regulators. It is, I don't think anyone who's truthful is going to say, oh, this is all well designed. We know what to do. We've got the handbook done. No way. That's happening as it goes forward. It's happening on a daily basis where we're seeing new provisions being placed in there because somebody figured out that they had to safeguard this particular area. So you've got to have some very specific compliance measures, requirements that they have to stay compliant year after year, not just in the opening, but after, and you should have termination clauses in your lease that says if you remain non-compliant, you need to, you're going to lose your license. I mean, you're going to lose your lease. And I would tell your landowners who are listening in, you have to take those measures. Don't leave those tenants in there thinking, well, at least they're paying the rent. I don't have to worry. For all the reasons that Leslie mentioned, and for all the reasons you can imagine.
So to be able to reach you guys, people want to talk to you. You want to give out your information about how people might be able to talk with you further about this?
Sure. Go to basecanna.com. That's the first step. That's where you could start. And then there's a contact section there. You can send us an email. We have a phone number that you can call us, a toll-free number. We'd be happy to help you with that. So we'd love to hear from your listeners, whether they be investors or potential entrepreneurs or landlords that want to have some contact with us and become part of our ecosystem. That would be wonderful.
Just want to encourage your listeners to sign up for a newsletter. We send a newsletter out about once a month. It's not that much, but we'll keep people updated on cannabis real estate industry news and information. It's very educational in nature.
Awesome. And we will put contact information in the show notes. So anybody goes to www.investfloridashow.com under our episode with Leslie and Jack, you will see the contact information for Base Canna. Stephen, anything else?
No, we're looking forward to seeing this industry develop here, and it's a whole new world. I guess it's kind of something like happened before our time when there was a prohibition on alcohol, and that all changed, and then now it's going on in cannabis. So it's evolving, and thank you for imparting all that information.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Enjoyed it.
And that was Leslie Plettner and Jack Boyajian from Base Canna. Stephen, it's a new world in the state of Florida in regards to medical marijuana. We're starting to see the proliferation of stores pop up around the state. It's going to be based just on the numbers, which we're going to put in the show notes, going to be a significant addition to the retail world in this state. Landlords are going to make a decision on whether they want to participate or not, but it's going to definitely be interesting. What were your thoughts?
Well, anytime a new player is coming to the market and there's the prospect of billions and billions dollars of business, landlords should pay attention. I think they have to look closely at whether it fits their center and whether they can profit for this opportunity. But it's not going away. It's only going to get stronger.
No doubt. And what's going to end up happening was with many of these retailers, not just Base Canna, this goes back to other retailers that the history of time is that somebody's going to emerge. There's going to be a handful of them that emerge and sort of dominate the market. And so you need to be careful about who you're selecting. You don't want undercapitalized firms basically taking your opportunity away from you if this is an industry that or a tenant that you decide to make an investment in. So, there's a lot of things you have to consider here if you're a retail landlord and you're thinking about allowing investing with one of these medical marijuana tenants in your center and how it fits and the potential ongoing concern. But I thought it was a really good discussion, Stephen. I was glad to get some of these points cleared up. Anything else that you want to talk about? Where can we find other guests that are informative?
Well, of course, the only place to go is the Invest Florida show. There you'll find a whole library of podcasts in the past and download them on your mobile device so that you can listen while you're driving or in the gym.
Guys, as always, we do appreciate the time that you invest with us each and every week. And until next episode, hasta la vista.
You've just listened to the Invest Florida podcast with Eric Odom and Stephen Silverman. Join us every week for actionable real estate investment ideas, and of course, visit our website at www.investfloridashow.com for more shows and tips on how to earn a cash flow in the real estate market in Florida. While hosts and producers of the Invest Florida show have no reason to doubt the validity of comments of our guests, we do not warranty their accuracy. Please check with your legal, financial, and tax advisors before entering into any investment. Returns will vary from person to person and deal to deal based on unique circumstances. All information expressed in this show is for educational purposes only. Opinions of the guests are not necessarily shared by the hosts and producers of the Invest Florida show.